Hey everyone, my name is Janice and welcome back to my channel. I will be wrapping up all of the books that I read in my birthday month of July. Admittedly, I did not read as much as I have in previous months, but just so you have a little bit of a look, this is what the pile looks like. And I will say I did not finish two books that I in fact started in July. The first is my Latin American pick for the month, Un Día en la Vida. I'm almost done with it. I will be finishing it around this week, like first week of August, so I will be reviewing this one at the end of this month. And the other book that I'm too lazy to get because it's in the other room is The Audacity of Hope by Barack Obama. Similarly, almost done with it, but won't quite finish it, you know, in time for this video, obviously, but just wait for that review at the end of August. But to kick things off, as usual, from my least favorite book of the month to my most favorite book of the month, first we have Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I am a reader who likes to try to give everything a chance, every book genre, so I typically lean towards literary fiction, but you know, I'm not opposed to trying out mystery or romance, obviously, or pop fiction type things. So this was an instance where I just was kind of in the mood for something fluffy, something fun and cute, and it was July, so like the July 4th weekend and festivities influenced my choosing this book this month. Unfortunately though, I did not enjoy this whatsoever. I ended up giving it 1 star. I know this is a beloved book, but frankly, I couldn't suspend my disbelief at all. I think if you go into this just wanting to have fun, and you have, I guess, greater powers of suspending your disbelief than I do, then you will love this book. Basically, it is about the first son of the United States, Alex, falling in love with a prince of England, whose name is Henry, who is second in line, I believe, to the throne, so, you know, he's kind of one of the spares, so he has a lot of pressure on him, but not as much as his older brother. And so it's a queer love story about politics sometimes, and I love politics, and I was actually kind of hoping that there would be like juicy political drama that wasn't as cringe as it ended up being. This is very much like politics light. For me, it actually ended up getting a little bit better by the end of the book because there was an election that took place at the end, and so we got more scenes solely around politics. The rest of it, you know, just felt really culturally try-hard. Like, obviously you could tell that the author doesn't really share the identities of the characters, which is totally fine. I mean, there are great writers who have written great works with characters that are not like them at all. But I don't know, like Henry, I guess for the sake of showing readers that like they knew about England and English culture, the author would have Henry mention like Jaffa cakes or croquettes or cornettos, or like say really stilted, like stereotypically posh things that like I just don't think sound totally natural. For example, there was like an exchange between Alex and Henry, and Alex says, "Do you ever get tired of pretending you're above this?" And then Henry says, "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." I get that, you know, Henry is a prince and is posh, but like I also think that posh people just say, "I don't know." Like, it's just so forced and unnatural. And then Alex, who is supposed to be half Mexican, is just randomly saying like elotes and crema and vato and like just random additions at the end of sentences that's like, hey reader, remember he's half Mexican. It just, yeah, not for me at all. So 1 star, I'm so sorry to say. Next up, a book that I gave 2 stars to. This is my short story collection of the month of July, Hit Parade of Tears. This is by Izumi Suzuki, and this was translated from the Japanese by a few people, by Sam Bett, David Boyd, Daniel Joseph and Helen O'Horan. So some stories were translated by some of these translators. Whoa. I just got a direct view of lightning, like just directly across from me. That was crazy. So what can I say? This was very weird. Actually, some of the stories, because they explore parallel universes and time travel and relationships across time in that way, definitely gave me 1Q84 vibes, like heavy vibes of that, but not as good. A lot of times these stories just were unfocused to me and weird for the sake of being weird and edgy. Like, they didn't feel substantial, and I hate saying this because it sounds so mean, but I didn't feel anything. I was just reading like quirky stories with like no baseline. It's very sassy, it's very, you know, daring with some of the plot lines that take place here. In one story, a woman kind of takes revenge on her husband by turning him into like salmon jerky. It's weird. That's all I can say. This is very weird, but it just didn't fully work for me, but I'm glad I gave it a chance. Then I gave 3 stars to the next couple of books. First is Knife by Salman Rushdie. This is his memoir that came out a few months ago this year about his experience being almost stabbed to death. In 2022, he was supposed to be giving a speech. At the beginning of the speech, some young crazy guy in the audience stood up, ran towards him, and stabbed him a bunch of times, and he ended up losing his right eye, but he's still with us, thankfully, and obviously still writing and as thoughtful as ever. With memoirs, it's always weird to give a rating to them just because I feel like I'm rating such a personal matter, which in this case is Rushdie just dealing with his own trauma. So how can I realistically rate it? But this is booktube, so I am rating it. So I ended up giving it 3 stars only because the best moments, the most interesting for me to read, were when Rushdie was philosophizing, when he was directly touching on the immediate aftermath of the stabbing, or even just him recollecting what it felt like in the instant that he like saw someone coming at him. There was this line where he said that what he saw out of his right eye was this guy coming at him, and that was the last thing he ever saw from his right eye. It's like such an objective statement, has so much weight now that you know that he in fact did lose his eye. So those poignant moments stand out to me. But of course, this is a memoir for him, and he can kind of tie whatever he wants to those main events that he's speaking of. So he did talk a lot about his current wife, who is a poet and a writer and a novelist in her own right, and like random reflections on Shakespeare, on other politics, on, you know, lots of literary allusions. I mean, demonstrate just how intelligent he is and how he can just thread any argument together. He can just draw from this one discipline and weave it together with this completely different discipline, and he has this beautiful argument put together by the end of the paragraph. He's a majestic writer, there's no question about that, and the way that he speaks about language here, he kind of breaks down the uses of knives in history, whether literal, physical knives or more figurative knives of language. So that was masterful, but I guess I just didn't really want to hear that much about his family, but it's his memoir, so can I really complain that much about it? Well, yeah, I guess on my channel I can, but I gave it 3 stars, but I do recommend this book if you are interested in seeing the more non-fiction side of Salman Rushdie. And another book I gave 3 stars to was All Fours by Miranda July. Similarly, this one came out I think last month, and this just reminded me that Miranda July's brain is a crazy, crazy place to be. She has no inhibitions when writing. She's the loosest, the freest, most playful modern writer that I think I've encountered, except maybe Otsesa Moshfegh. But Miranda July, just you can tell how much fun and how free-flowing her process is. So in here, July explores non-traditional marriage and relationships, female rage and sexuality, and ageism also. We have a woman who is in her 40s who decides to buy a car, take a road trip from California all the way to New York. She has recently gotten some money for some copy that she wrote, I think years prior, that is now getting popular, and she's getting money for that. So with that money, she's trying to just be a little luxurious for a little bit. She wants to splurge and just treat herself alone without her husband and her kid. And along the way, her plan kind of reshapes itself, because that's what life is. You have plans and then they all fall apart and you just kind of deal with it. So it follows her exploring her sexuality, meeting new people along the way, and rethinking who she is and what love and desire means to her. July's talent, her linguistic talent, her command and assertiveness kept me glued to the page. I will say the text itself kind of mimics the plot. So just as the main character's plan of taking a road trip from one coast to the other kind of falters and reshapes itself, so does the plot because of that. And so I just felt a little bit like I was meandering and I didn't know where I was going, similar to the character, but it just felt very unsettling sometimes. The plot takes a risk and essentially abandons itself or its first initial premise, which reminds me a lot of Laura Vandenberg's short stories. Sometimes you start the story thinking something's going to happen, and then by the end of the story, that initial plot point actually was like a red herring in a way. And I feel like this novel functions similarly. You will not get likable characters here at all. You will get very real, very layered people whose decisions may drive you crazy like they did me. But it does get you thinking about, like I said, female rage and sexuality and how that's ever changing, and that everyone just has a right to go with the flow and go with what the moment asks for. In their flaws, the characters were hyper real, but I guess because of the meandering plot and not feeling like I found my footing quite yet, I'll have to give this a 3. I just realized the books are next to me and I have not been showing them at all, so I'm a great YouTuber. This was all 4s. I actually had borrowed it from the library, but it was due and I hadn't finished it yet, so I just bought it, which, you know, given that I gave it 3 stars, I might sort of regret it, because, you know, this is a brand new hardcover, $29, was not cheap, but hey, whatever, a new one to my collection. But next up, another book that I gave 3 stars to. This was my big book challenge for July, and it's another Salman Rushdie, but this time his fiction, and it is the ever popular Midnight's Children. This blew my brain. My brain hurts from reading this. So much going on. So for the first time, I actually annotated my book. I was tracing descriptions of Kashmir, that was the pink. I was tracing religion, specifically meditations on Islam, which is the red. Instances of intra-racial sentiments, which is the dark green, then race as it relates to other races outside of the South Asian sphere, that is the lighter green, and then, what is it, the blue is like self-reflection from the main character, Salim Sinai, on the writing of this book and what it means and how that relates to this whole Midnight's Children thing, and I think that's it. I think those were the main ones that I was tracing. I don't even know how to describe this book because it's epic in scope, to say the least. The main character is Salim Sinai. We learn in the beginning of the book that he is one of thousands of kids who was born at midnight on the day of Indian independence. And so he is essentially as old as India is every single day of his life. And we learn later on that him and the other children who were also born at midnight. They all have this sort of psychic connection, and they can communicate with each other no matter where they are dispersed in the world. He can like read their minds and can kind of teleport mentally to where they are, and yeah, they have this mental connection. Through his narration of his own life, we learn about the entire history of India up to, well, his day, like the day that he's telling the story. And you get so many details. I have literally no idea how Salman Rushdie wrote this. I believe in the introduction here, he mentions that he actually had another job, and he wrote this around that full-time job. So crazy. I guess it just shows you that every writer has a different path, that, you know, not everyone is Zadie Smith and writes a super popular, amazing literary fiction while they're an undergrad. There were a lot of cool experiments here. There's a moment where Salim kind of talks about politicians and how politics functions by way of a magic group, how some people kind of shapeshift, and the way that he described all of that and figuratively was really brilliant. Rushdie can do absolutely anything with words. If you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, I think this book, I mean, is not like Forrest Gump, but in the idea that a character is kind of influencing history, but is doing so unbeknownst to himself. So in the movie Forrest Gump, you know, Forrest will have that smiley face shirt on. He just did that because he wanted to, and he was running across the country and other people saw it and were taking pictures, and then it became a trend, and the smiley face, like emoji, not emoji, but the smiley face became like popular and took over the United States and the world, and it like gives credit to Forrest, but he didn't really know that he was going to change the course of human history. Similarly is Salim Sinai and his family. And also a twist that is revealed here, I think, is essential in understanding like Indian-Pakistani relations and class. There's just so much going on here. I think because it's so dense with history, with names, I was lost a lot of the time. I don't think I fully have grasped the greatness of this book quite yet. For now, I'll give it 3 stars because, I mean, there's a lot to admire here, but there's just so much that I still don't fully comprehend. I'll have to do more reading online. God, there's so much. There is so much. So many names, so many characters, so many years, so many politicians. It's a lot. The next book was actually a reread for me, and it is by Otessa Moshfegh. It is My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Not really gonna go too much into this because I've already reviewed it on this channel. The narrator is kind of stuck in life, and she decides to medicate herself with the help of one of the worst psychiatrists in the history of psychiatry. And she essentially like sleeps for a year. She is obnoxious, she's very condescending, she is judgmental, she's the definition of an unlikable character. But just Moshfegh knows how to write those characters so well. And, you know, a reread for me, but I still really liked it, and it still remains 3.5 stars, but I think this is my favorite Moshfegh. And then my favorite book of the month, I gave this 3.5, kind of 4 stars. It's The Extinction of Irina Ray by Jennifer Croft. So Jennifer Croft is a novelist, obviously, in her own right, but she is also maybe mostly known for being Olga Tokarczuk's translator. And she has won the International Booker with Olga either once or twice, I can't remember now, but this is a crazy book. So there's a fictional Polish author here at the center. Her name is Irina Ray, and Irina she has a group of 8 translators. Each translator translates from Polish to another language. Irina likes to refer to them by their languages. So these 8 usually right before one of her books is published, they go to her house in Poland, in a town, specifically the town called Białowieża. I hope I remember that correctly. I actually listened to this book while I was reading it physically, which was very helpful for some of the pronunciation, even though the narrator was obviously not fluent in like anything other than English, but at least she tried with the Polish. But yeah, so they go to Białowieża, and they think that they're there again just to translate, the usual deal. They all kind of worship Irina Rey. They think she's the best author, and they just have full admiration of her and her work. While they're there, though, we quickly learn that she kind of goes missing. She's there for a second, and then they never see her again. And then the translators basically take on this mystery. They try to find where she is, and they try to find clues in her work. So already, I think you maybe get the sense that this is definitely a commentary on literary commentary, on how reliable it is to analyze literature. Can you separate the work from the author? But also on reliability in the world of translation. So what I didn't mention is that this book, The Extinction of Irina Rey, was actually written by one of the 8 translators named Emmy, and she is from Argentina, and she obviously translates from Polish to Spanish. But what we're reading in English was translated from Spanish to, was translated to English by the Polish to English translator of the 8, who is actually kind of enemies with Emmy. So no one is to be trusted, right? Because Emmy, we learn, is just kind of a diehard, she's almost like in a literary cult. Her worship for Irina Rey is so high. But because she has this beef with the English language translator who is translating her work, you never know like what is actually the real document, or is every document just filtered through our own experience and biases, even if we're trying to be impartial. Jennifer Croft, who I will say looks kind of like a twin of Laura Marling. I am so glad that she pointed out so many things that I think about too. Some of the themes here that she explores, obviously translation, but the overrepresentation of certain languages in translation, the overrepresentation of white translators in the world of translation. She here talks about how POC are treated in Poland. She talks about trauma and ecosystem, hyper-nationalism. Imagine like petty reality TV, but everyone is an academic. Everybody here is gossipy and, like I said, petty. They engage in such petulant behavior, but they're all really smart. So if you like that, if that sounds fun to you, then you will have a good time with this book. This was gorgeously written, whip smart, super intelligent. There's a lot here that I have yet to kind of synthesize, but it's so thought-provoking. I don't think, every loose end was tied up neatly. By the end, there's a lot of confusion still. But yeah, it's definitely taking a very critical, funny, kind of dark look at the cult of the literary world, and the cult of authorship. I think it's phenomenal. It's one of my favorites of the year. And yeah, I will continue to just devour anything Jennifer Croft writes and translates. Although I will admit, I have never read any Olga Tokarczuk, or any of the books that she has translated, but she's high on my list of translators. And yes, those are all the books that I finished in the month of July. A shorter list, but some substantial reads, I would say. So other than that, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye! you.